In the 17th century, one man would cast a shadow over all of Europe. A king who believed he was, well, more than a man. A ruler whose ambition would build a palace of impossible splendor and at the same time plunge a continent into war. This is the story of his glory and its terrible, terrible price.
And here he is, Louis XIV. You know him as the Sun King. Now, he inherited a kingdom that was more unified, more powerful than anything a French king had ever seen before. The great nobles, they'd been humbled, their castles torn down. The religious wars that had ripped the country apart, over. The stage was perfectly set for one man to seize absolute, total control. So how do you justify that kind of power? Well, here's how. This wasn't just a political theory to him. It was a divine mandate. The king was God's lieutenant on earth. So to question him wasn't just foolish, it was a sin. His power wasn't granted by law, you see. It was granted by heaven itself.
So how did he take this idea and make it real? How did he cement this godlike authority? Well, he inherited a France that was ready for a powerful king. There was no parliament to check him, no Bill of Rights to limit his ambition. He was totally free to build a world that revolved entirely around him.
You know, this idea, the divine right of kings, it was his ultimate weapon. Think about it. If the king was good, you thank God. But what if he was cruel or foolish? Well, that was just a punishment from God for your own sins. Either way, obedience was your only option.
To project this kind of immense power, you need more than just an idea. You need a stage. A monument so huge, so grand, it would completely dazzle the world and, more importantly, domesticate his rivals. He needed Versailles. I mean, just look at this place. The endless halls, the sprawling gardens. Versailles wasn't just a home, it was a political instrument. It was a massive declaration of French glory designed to awe and intimidate every single visitor. But even more importantly, it was built to control every powerful person in his kingdom. And the cost? Get ready for this. An estimated $100 million. And that's in 19th century money. We're talking billions today. A staggering, staggering sum, built with the forced, unpaid labor of thousands of peasants and soldiers. It's an unimaginable price for one man's vision of glory. And here's the genius of it, in a twisted way. Versailles worked as this brilliant, glittering trap. The great nobles, right? These guys were once feudal lords with their own armies. But they were lured to the palace, and they traded their castles, their real power, for the so-called honor of handing the king his shirt in the morning. They became totally dependent courtiers. Rivals turned into beggars, all of them trapped in this beautiful golden cage.
But Louis's ambition, it couldn't be contained within the walls of Versailles. And all that splendor had a price. He saw his wars as his chief glory, and pretty soon the grandeur at home would be paid for with blood abroad.
This really captures the two faces of the Sun King, doesn't it? On one side, you have this great patron of arts and sciences, but on the other, you have a warlord, a man whose attacks were frankly inexcusable, who devastated his neighbors and bled his own country dry, all in this endless quest for glory.
And his aggression was just relentless. First, he invades the Spanish Netherlands. Then he invades Holland. All of Europe is just watching in alarm as this massive French war machine rolls across the continent, conquering territory and completely shattering the balance of power.
But the king's cruelty, it wasn't just reserved for his foreign enemies. Soon, he would turn his immense power against his own people, all because he wanted absolute unity in faith. So let me introduce you to the Huguenots. These were about 1 million French Protestants, and they were known for being incredibly industrious and successful. I mean, they weren't just a religious minority, they were an economic powerhouse. They were basically the engine of French commerce. And then Louis began to dismantle their entire world, piece by horrible piece. First, he had their churches demolished. Then, he passed laws that literally tore children from their parents' faith. And then came the real horror of the Dragonades. I want you to imagine brutal soldiers living in your home, with permission to do whatever it took to break you, to frighten your family into giving up your faith. It was state-sponsored terror. And finally, in 1685, he just outlawed their religion entirely. So, having crushed dissent at home and waged war on his neighbors, Louis was ready for his final, greatest gamble, an opportunity to seize an entire empire and create a superpower the world had never, ever seen. This was the question that had all of Europe holding its breath. The Spanish king was dying. He was childless, and his empire, which spanned Europe and the Americas, was completely up for grabs. The will is red, and the heir to all of it is Louis's own grandson. For Louis, family pride and personal ambition were just too strong. He accepted the will, he claimed a global empire for his family, and basically dared the rest of Europe to try and stop him. The War of the Spanish Succession had begun. That war was long, it was bloody, and it was ruinous. It was really a world war, fought from the fields of Europe all the way to the colonies in North America. So, after more than a decade of fighting, what was left of Louis's grand ambition? Well, the treaty completely redrew the map of Europe. Louis's grandson got to keep Spain, but that dream of a united superpower? Dead. Austria was a big winner, gaining territory in the Netherlands and Italy. But the biggest winner? England. It gained strategic colonies in North America and the Fortress of Gibraltar, beginning the slow expulsion of France from the New World. And what about France? After 72 years on the throne, the Sun King left behind a nation on its knees. The treasury was empty. The population was actually smaller. The people were miserable. By driving out the Huguenots, he had basically performed a kind of economic self-mutilation, a wound that the nation would feel for generations. The sun had finally set. So you look back. He created Versailles. He patronized the arts. He made France the absolute center of European culture. But he also waged brutal wars, persecuted his own people, and left his kingdom in ruins. A reign of unmatched splendor and a legacy of debt and despair. So you have to ask yourself, was all that glory really worth the price? That is the question his shadow leaves behind.